thanks for joining, for your interest in RISA. This call here today and the one that we had last Monday are basically to help orient applicants to the process of developing a RISA proposal. The RISA, or the Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program, is one of a few different programs here at the Climate Program Office that are focused on building capacity for those who seek to manage climate variability and change, and essentially identifying risks and impacts. And we'll get into this more, but so this is one of several competitions that the Climate Program Office is advertising. But given the nature of RISA, we wanted to provide folks an opportunity to ask questions and understand a little bit more in a different format than reading through all the materials associated with the FFO. Everything, though, that we're covering in this webinar here today is by and large contained in the information sheet on RISA's, on the Climate and Societal Interactions Division. That includes both the RISA competition as well as competitions associated with our sister programs, the Sectoral Applications and Research Program and the Coast and Ocean Climate Applications Program. So you want to read carefully through the information sheet, which describes in detail the RISA program objectives and the different priorities for these competitions, as well as the federal funding opportunity itself. So today we'll be covering both the RISA program objectives, a few points about some key partners of RISA, and then the specific priorities in the funding opportunity, as well as the review criteria. That's in the review criteria in the federal funding opportunity are very critical things to look carefully at, and then we'll leave some time for question and answer. Okay, so since 1995, RISA has been supporting research teams to help expand and build the nation's capacity to prepare for and adapt to climate variability and change. The RISA is really built on a foundation of partnerships, process, and trust. RISA teams have been effective because they've been able to create lasting relationships with decision makers from both the public and private sectors. And that really underscores the partnership. Because partnerships require trust, that's why it's such an essential part of what RISAs do. And that's all done through a process of learning, a process where we learn a little bit about how scientists engage decision makers and where each decision makers can learn from scientists and vice versa. Again, it's really built on a foundation of partnerships, process, and trust. Oops, this keeps defaulting back to, okay. This conceptual diagram is really helps us just sort of place RISA within the science to use of science continuum. So the core goals or objectives in shorthand are written in the middle column here. Understand context or decision context, understand risks, sustain knowledge networks or sustain engagement, innovate services, and learning through practice or advancing science policy. So it's through advancing these goals or objective areas that the usable science that RISA's developed help inform how different sectors can respond to climate risks, such as food production, water management, and urban planning. It's an iterative process that's highly informed through sustained dialogue between managers and decision makers and scientists. So that's hence the reason the inform arrow goes both ways. We intend for RISAs to actually be on the ground engaging folks, and so this is a learning process for the scientific community and the decision makers. But at the same time, since they're academically based and they are funded to do research, RISA's advanced understanding across a range of disciplines. So the idea here is that when we say that RISA's conduct interdisciplinary integrated research, that means a couple of different things. That it's more than, or it's separate from multidisciplinary research, where you have all of these different disciplines on the right-hand side involved. But it's multi- and interdisciplinary research. And when we say interdisciplinary research, we mean that those disciplines are coalescing around these common objectives of understanding context, understanding risks, sustaining knowledge networks, innovating services. So that tells us something about, in terms of this double arrow that says enhance, that tells us something about how the scientific community can gradually design efforts to make science more usable over time. We have 11 different RISAs around the country in Alaska, and including Alaska and the Pacific Islands. And each of these programs is different. So while we have those common objectives that I showed, that's not by any stretch a cookie-cutter approach. We really look at the RISA capabilities to emerge from the regions and to be based on the needs and priorities and problems that the each region is facing. So each one has its own natural disasters. Each one has its own institutional context and perspectives with respect to climate. So we encourage that diversity, and we look for people to innovate different approaches based on their regional, local, and institutional context. This is a little bit about how we have expanded the number of teams over time. We have only in 2011 did we get to the current size of the network. We have had some major fiscal constraints over the past few years. We have, though, kept the RISA program budget fairly solid or fairly stable. And we also received funding from the National Integrated Drought Information System Coping with Drought Initiative. That's effectively the research and development arm of NIDIS that looks to do research, interdisciplinary research and applications, particularly around the development of regional early warning system capability and drought impacts research. The NOAA assessment program is primarily oriented towards both place-based and problem-focused assessments, but also highly influential assessments. And so a lot of that work goes towards, at least over the past several years, the National Climate Assessment, the U.S. National Climate Assessment, to a certain extent the IPCC, but RISA has played a huge role in the regional chapters of the National Assessment as well as the regional technical input reports. And we envision RISA's playing a key role in the sustained assessment, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Here are the regions being competed. We are competing 6 regions, the Pacific Islands, Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West, Great Lakes, Urban Northeast, and the Southeast. So we're broadly outlining the regions that we're competing. Within any one region, it's up to the applicants to define a rationale for why you're picking those regions. So, for example, if you're looking at, you know, the Pacific Islands, You might consider how much of the Hawaiian archipelago and the U.S. Pacific Islands you've chosen, why. If you're looking at, say, the urban Northeast, obviously that's a thematic region. It's defined largely by some of the risks that the highly populated areas along the Northeast corridor are facing. And then there's other regions like the Southeast that are covered by states but have some hopefully some programmatic connectivity to other RISAs in the Carolinas and in the southern U.S. You might, I'm probably anticipating some questions here, at least we've been getting this question quite a bit offline, which is why no Mid-Atlantic or Midwest or North Central RISA? So we have gaps in the RISA map that we have chosen not to compete this year due to funding constraints. We had hoped to have those competitions in this funding opportunity, but that was entirely contingent upon the program getting the increase that was slated in the FY15 President's budget. We now know as a result of the Senate and House of Representatives budget marks that we're not going to receive that level of funding, and so we're not competing in those regions. So we have a close relationship with the National Integrated Drought Information System. As I said, RISAs do a lot of work on drought impacts research and research on experimental drought indicators and just in general how to communicate the science around drought. They also, by virtue of the funding that we get through the Coping with Drought Initiative, contribute to the development of the Regional Early Warning System development, or Regional Drought Early Warning System pilots. And I believe we have Lisa Darby or Chad McNutt from NIDIS here to describe a little bit about the pilots.
Hi, Lisa Darby here. Thanks, Adam. The map that you see there shows where current and future drought early warning systems will be developed by NIDIS, and these drought early warning systems were established to prototype various approaches for developing regional drought early warning systems, and we're working to demonstrate a variety of early warning and drought risk reduction strategies. And this is in partnership with stakeholders, and we work with federal, state, regional, and local agencies. From the pilots, we can develop best practices for drought early warning. So each pilot region that's indicated on the map has its own unique drought and water issues, but there are also similar needs across these areas for different kinds of products. So we do attempt to transfer lessons learned from one pilot region to another. The RISAs are really helpful for NIDIS and these drought early warning systems by helping us to identify key water issues and drought issues in the regions, and also to identify the key people that we should be working with to design and implement the pilot activities. And also the RISAs are, well, it depends on which pilot, but some RISAs are very heavily engaged with the stakeholders and in helping us to develop and disseminate drought early warning information. So there's different levels of engagement among the RISAs for these pilots. It all depends on the pilot needs and what the RISA's goals are.
Great, thanks so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
In addition to NIDIS and other, there are a whole host of other offices, programs, labs, partners of NOAA, internal offices and close partners in NOAA that contribute to our climate-related activities and initiatives. This is just a map kind of showing some of where some of those key partners are, and not only where they are spread out across the U.S., but just the diversity of people. We don't expect all the applicants to connect with every single one of these offices, but we do encourage applicants to speak to how they will work with offices of NOAA, particularly folks who provide scientific information in an operational service context. So that could be river forecast centers who are providing stream flow forecasts. It could be regional climate centers, which we'll talk about in a second, who provide applied climate data and information products and observations-based products. But it might also include folks outside the weather and climate realm, like our coastal service centers or our national estuarine research reserves, who have programs that are very complementary to RISA's in the sense that they're both tool and information-based, but also process-based, providing training and participatory processes to help people think about how climate affects their decision space. We also have 6 regional climate service directors who support the development and delivery of a wide range of place-based science and information products. The RCSDs are federal employees of NOAA, and they're listed in the information sheet. We're encouraging that folks contact them because they have, as part of their job, they have a really strong sense of what's happening in the region, particularly among our federal partners, but also state and local partners, understanding what their needs and priorities are and where there are potential areas for partnership and where there are potential areas for decision support. So they're a very valuable resource in terms of increasing awareness and maintaining awareness of what's happening in the region, and also networking. So I think we might have, not sure if we have any RCSDs joining us today, and if so, if they wanted to say anything. Sounds like not. But anyway, we're encouraging, we listed folks in the information sheet because we're strongly encouraging folks connect to the RCSDs and discuss with them what sort of priorities you're thinking about and how that could mesh with existing priorities or needs in the region. We also have the NOAA funds the regional climate centers. There are 6 RCCs throughout the U.S. They're similar to RISA's in that they're university-based, but they have, I would say, complementary and distinct objectives. Whereas RISA's are interdisciplinary and integrated, looking across a range of sectors and perhaps developing more sustained engagement, the RCCs also interact with a diverse range of people, but primarily to look at the production delivery of climate data, information, and knowledge. So there's a lot of focus on applied climate data and information tools and information products, observations. And so there's a really healthy partnership between RISA's and RCC's in many cases. In fact, we have some RISA's who come in with co-PIs who are leads for our regional climate centers, and that forms a really good partnership and has led to fruitful collaborations. In other cases, we have shared investigators or collaborative projects. Again, this isn't a requirement of RISA proposals, but it's something that we encourage folks, the kinds of partnerships that we encourage folks to look at. One example of how all of these entities work together, NIDIS, the Regional Climate Service Directors, state climatologists, the regional climate centers, and offices of the National Weather Service, like the Climate Prediction Center, is the Managing Drought webinar series. So this was organized by the Southern RCSD, Dave Brown, NIDIS, and the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program, RISA, and you can find out more information on their website. But basically, when the drought, the Southern Plains drought hit around 2011, 2012, there was a need identified to start providing some ongoing information about how the drought conditions were unfolding, what might be anticipated over the next season, or perhaps even longer time scales, to translate some of the information products that NOAA has and the RISA has that could be used now, but also for space for decision makers to talk within each other, for water managers to talk to city planners, to talk to ranchers, and understand what sort of strategies they were using to cope with drought. And so, again, it became it's sort of an engagement mechanism and a learning process for learning how do people cope with drought and what are the impacts that they were facing as a result of that drought. But it was an opportunity as well to showcase all the different information that people could use. So as a part of this competition, we have a new initiative. As I mentioned before, RISAs are a key part of the National Climate Assessment, but what we're trying to work towards is having more expert and human capacity within the RISAs to support the sustained assessment. So we're advertising, we want to hear as a part of these proposals, but as sort of a separate initiative, how might people host sustained assessment specialists, and what would they do with those people to undertake the following activities: synthesizing research and findings about adaptation activities, risks, vulnerability, impact analyses as input to the next National Climate Assessment, synthesizing and conveying information about decision-making needs to shape the next assessment, acting as a liaison between the RISA network within a National Climate Assessment region, and the conversations happening among agencies who participate in the U.S. Global Change Research Program, including NOAA and the RCSDs, the Regional Climate Service Directors, and then providing information to the RISAs within a region about how some of those conversations at USGCRP are unfolding, where there are opportunities to plug into the NCA, what their priorities might be, and how to develop resources like fact sheets and digital graphics and platforms. So the one thing I would say here is that we have specified that this person would be a resident at a RISA, where they can really benefit from understanding the range of activities happening within the RISA as well as the neighboring RISAs within that region, but also really learn from the evolving practice of RISAs happening as a whole, the national network. We listed that they could be a resource, this person could collaborate across 2 or 3 RISAs, and I would say that you can approach that a number of different ways. So if you look at the information sheet, there are broad areas that you need to think about in terms of constructing your RISA proposal, like geographic focus, issue focus, and so forth. You could think of the sustained assessment specialist in the same vein. Perhaps somebody is collaborating across 2 or 3 RISAs on a particular issue, where it may be sort of extra-regional, or it could be, primarily defined by the issues that the 2 or 3 RISAs within an NCA region have identified as important. So we're really looking for folks to come up with innovative approaches as to how to utilize this capacity in these individuals for the sustained assessment objectives. And we would encourage folks to go onto the USGCRP website. Under their reports section, you should be able to find a link to the sustained assessment report that lays out a number of different priorities. We are suggesting that this person, that there's $150,000 to $200,000 per year over 3 years, possibly longer, to support these folks. And lastly, I would just say that we're hoping that that these folks could, over time, if we only have, for example, 2 or 3 years of funding for this position, that part of your proposal articulates how you're creating an institutional environment where that person could continue on doing RISA activities or contribute to similar assessment activities over time. In other words, where there's a welcoming institutional environment and how that person fits in, not just with the RISA, but also the host institutions associated with your RISA. So just to pull out the specific costs or funding available in the in this, we're advertising for core RISA teams at the range of $500,000 to $700,000 per year for up to 5 years. So that's $500,000 or $700,000 per year for up to 5 years for each of the 6 regions that I showed on my earlier slide. With the sustained assessment specialist, like I said, $150,000 to $200,000 per year per person, including indirect costs. And that says for 3 to 5 years. I would say, I think actually it was more like 3 years, with the potential for 2 additional years. And then all of this is dependent upon budget appropriation. So as you can see in our budget slide, our budget fluctuates from year to year, slightly depending on budget appropriations. So then, finally, and then we'll leave some time for question and answer, just to go over the review criteria. And so these are in the federal funding opportunity document. But they are different than other programs within the Climate Program Office. So you want to look for the review criteria that are relevant to the Climate and Societal Interactions, or CSI division. So relevant score includes something about relevance to the program objectives, but also for the applicant's approach for engaging decision makers and building networks of relationships to help support decision makers with scientific information, and then sharing data. As far as technical merit, which is a majority of the score for the review process, you're looking at the scientific merit and innovativeness, the credibility in capacity building approaches. So have you done RISA-like work before? And do you have some of those existing relationships and a foundation of trust? How well the proposal clearly identifies the institutional framework for implementing the research articulated. So here we're really looking for how well can you support the program objectives, and can you advance some of those practices and objectives? And then the other two are fairly common, the qualifications of investigators and project costs. So for more information, you can go to our website, download, again, the key documents are the full federal funding opportunity, as well as the CSI information sheet, which includes RISA. Also, please check on the RISA section of the Climate Program Office webpage, and we'll send this out to a link of this to all of you. But we are developing a page that is exclusive to the RISA competition, where you can view a recording of this webinar, both the presentation and the audio. So you can watch it again if you missed anything. There's already a recording we'll have from last Monday's webinar, and then we plan to post a frequently asked questions document from both the questions that we receive offline or outside of the webinars, as well as the questions that came up last Monday and that come up in discussion right now. So with that, I'll open the floor to questions.
Hey, Adam. Josh Foster here from Zurich Northwest. I got a number of quick questions. One is that it says at one point in the overall award description that only SARP awards will be cooperative agreements, that all other agreements will be grants. Does that mean that the RISAs are now grants and not cooperative agreements?
No, that sounds to me like a typo. I mean,
okay.
Just to back up, for those of you who don't know, a majority of the funding that comes out of the Climate Program Office goes to grants. And a cooperative agreement is one type of grant, so that's actually incorrect to begin with. But what we mean by a cooperative agreement, there are different types of cooperative agreements. NOAA has cooperative institutes. They have their own NOAA administrative order that lays out a number of different stipulations and mechanisms associated with those cooperative agreements. These RISA awards will be cooperative agreements, but in this case, what we mean by a cooperative agreement associated with the RISA is that we anticipate some degree of interaction with the RISA team. So we have monthly calls that we host with RISA teams just to share information across the network, information about the program, but also information about people's ongoing research activities. We have an annual meeting with RISA investigators, and actually folks should plan on allocating travel budget for at least 2 participants, the lead investigator or investigators and the program managers to attend that meeting, and it's usually somewhere within the U.S. So we expect some degree of interaction and engagement between the RISA teams and NOAA. So sorry, Josh, your other questions were?
Another question is that there's a comment that says we need to submit 2 SF424A's budget documents for the RISA, one for years 1 through 4 and one for year 5. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the final one was that it said something about in the review process there's no weighting from outreach and education activities. Looks like 0 weighting. Maybe I'm just misinterpreting that, but.
So that's a completely different criteria. So obviously, you know, if I'll go back here to the, to the review criteria, the kinds of things that we're talking about in the review criteria, education and outreach, for example, are an important part of engaging decision makers and building networks of relationships to help support decision makers with scientific information. Those are preset criteria, and so the fact that it's weighted 0 doesn't mean it's not an important part of what we anticipate, the kinds of activities we anticipate RISA is doing. It just means that as formally defined by grants management, we are not drawing on that criteria.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
Hey, Adam, this is Kirsten Lackstrom from CISA. And could I just ask for a little bit more clarification about the Sustained Assessment Specialist?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Did you want more clarification in general, or did you have a specific question?
Well, yeah, just maybe a couple things. So it's my understanding that it's just the RISAs that are up for the rebid for this year or for those competing in those particular regions that would include that in their proposal. But to the extent that others could be part of that proposal for the sustained assessment, specialists, if they're covering more than one region, at what point do they get involved? So say CISA wants to collaborate with another potential RISA or group of, partners. At what point do we need to be involved in the LOI or the full proposal? Would it matter where the specialist was actually placed in terms of, which organization within that collaborative? Those sorts of things, kind of the logistics. And also, when, we put the RISA teams together, there's usually kind of a core group of investigators who are already named. And would this be like a person? Are we going to be adding a person at this point, or do you expect that this would be like a position that is being proposed and it would be filled later?
Okay, so generally speaking, the questions are: at what point do we expect applicants to connect with people who aren't competing for RISA awards, the existing RISAs who aren't competing for RISA awards, or vice versa? What are some of the logistics in terms of where these people are located? And then third, when do we expect these positions to come on board?
Right.
So we, I guess it's implicit in, but just to make it more explicit, this notion that we're envisioning these folks being a quote-unquote shared resource across 2 or 3 RISAs. We would highly encourage applicants to connect with RISA teams, existing RISA teams that aren't competing, to figure out what they are doing, what they did in this last round for the 3rd National Climate Assessment, how they envision linking to future iterations of the National Climate Assessment, including the priorities in the sustained assessment. So, for you, since you're a part of the Carolinas RISA, just for the benefit of everybody, absolutely be proactive, but also folks should be contacting you, to figure out how best to coordinate what you guys have in mind in terms of what CISA, the Carolinas RISA, does for the sustained assessment and what other people are thinking. We realize that that's not a perfect process. We ideally we could have advertised this opportunity for all the RISAs, but we had a sort of specific opportunity arise, and we really felt like this would be a great way to add capacity to the regions. So we didn't want to pass it up. As far as where the people are located, if in your deliberations you find that there are some creative solutions to hosting the person that make for a better institutional arrangement where the person isn't necessarily directly located at the institution that's applying for the main RISA award, that's fine, but I think you have to justify that. I could envision probably a fair bit of travel money allocated to these people since they'll need to move within the region. And then finally, as far as where they're coming on board, I think, you mentioned the LOIs. That there's only so much space in the letters of intent, and I would really focus on getting the rationale and the sort of vision for the RISA proposal nailed down before trying to spend too much time and effort proposing the sustained assessment specialist. So I think that a really strong RISA proposal has to be in place in order for this to be successful. But when we identify, when we review proposals, we'll identify a top-ranked proposal for each region. We'll crosswalk that with people's ideas for the sustained assessment specialist. And then we move into a phase where we get back to the applicants and we tell the top-ranked proposal from each applicant from each region that we're going to recommend them for funding. At that point, there's an opportunity before we actually submit all of the award paperwork to have conversations with people about any issues that might have come up, you know, that were still unresolved, or that you know, where we could potentially come up with some solutions that might make it a more sustainable position or solution. And so there will be a phase where we can scope out some, have some further refinement of scope for this kind of competition. Does that answer your questions?
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing a question coming in online. When are the LOIs and proposals due? I believe the LOIs are due on August 6th, and the full proposals are due in September. Actually, I don't have the date offhand. If you go to the
October 20th.
October 20th, thank you.
And LOIs are due next Sunday, August 10th.
Right, and actually that brings up a question on that came up in the last webinar. Did we really mean for the deadline to be on a Sunday? That's partly an art. So once we hand the final materials over to grants management, they spit out an automatic set of deadlines based on 30 days and 90 days. And in this case, it just worked out that it was due on Sunday. But you know, we've been highly encouraging folks, both for the sake of your sanity and not working on the weekend, but also just to avoid any sort of technical glitches with submitting your LOI, to try to submit by the end of this Friday. Other questions? Okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Like I said, we should have frequently asked questions posted within the next day or two, and we'll continually update those. You can go to the Climate Program Office website for information about the federal funding opportunity, and if you go to the RISA page specifically on the right-hand side, you should see a RISA FY15 FFO page that you can link to, and that has the FAQs and a whole bunch, the recording from this webinar, last Monday's webinar, and all of the relevant documents, including the CSI information sheet. So thanks, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing the LOIs and the proposals.